part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. Well, it was a busy week in college basketball. The first full week of conference games just took place, and things have changed dramatically over the scope of college basketball. In the first half, I'm going to look back at the week that was in college basketball. I'm going to look at the top 25 and see where we are, as well as the upcoming games this weekend and where we could stand going into next week as we hit mid-January. And in the second half, it's going to be a focus on coaches. So we are about halfway through the year, and at this point, most teams know, for the majority of the teams, where they stand and how this year is going to go. So in the second half, we're going to look at some coaches who are not just on the hot seat, but if I were the athletic directors of those schools, they should probably be gone immediately or at the close of this season. I'm also going to look at coaches that maybe have 1 year left to prove themselves, but the results have not matched what is expected of them. And then also a couple head coaches that were on the hot seat entering into this season, but are actually on a pretty good trajectory and have gotten off the hot seat because of the results so far heading into the second half of the year. So look forward to that in the second half. But first of all, like I said, we're going to look at some of the results over this past week. And man, it was a crazy week in college basketball. 4 of the top 5 teams in the AP poll all went down midweek. Very surprising results, but that's what you get with conference season, is when teams know each other, they know their tendencies, they know their strategies, they know the players. It's easier to do scouting, and so conference season is going to be topsy-turvy every year, but I think this year especially, as we get into an era where with the transfer portal and players coming and going, it's really hard to build consistency. And even if you're in that top 5, that top 10, there are so many new players at your program, and winning is just not the norm for a lot of the players that have transferred in. I think we're going to see a lot more upsets this year and moving forward as the portal continues to grow. So first of all, looking back at the week in college basketball, on Tuesday night, there were 2 major upsets. It has not happened very much. I think only 3 or 4 times in the history of college basketball where the number 1 and the number 2 teams both lost to unranked teams on the road in the same night. Nebraska took down number 1 Purdue. Purdue now has 2 losses in the Big Ten, or 2 losses overall, both in the Big Ten and both on the road to unranked opponents. First of all, Northwestern, and now at Nebraska, and it wasn't just a loss. They lost to Nebraska by 16 points. Now, granted, Nebraska was absolutely on fire in this game. They shot an incredible percentage, and they looked like a tournament team at this point in the season. So a pretty stunning result there. And Purdue now falls in the middle of the Big Ten in the standings. I still have a lot of confidence in Zach Edey. I still think they're the team to beat in the Big Ten. But this is a little worrisome that now they have 2 Big Ten losses on the road, and their chances of repeating as conference champions are being threatened right now. Also on Tuesday night, Iowa State took down number 2 Houston at Iowa State. If you follow college basketball close enough, you know that the home court of Iowa State is called Hilton Magic because of how difficult it is to play there, and how no matter how good or bad Iowa State is during a normal season, it's still almost impossible to win there. They have a huge home court advantage. And on Tuesday night, they took down Houston 57-53, which is wild because Houston, with the defensive strategy that they have, want to keep the game in the 50s, in the 60s. So the pace of the game was right where Houston wanted it to be, and yet Iowa State, with that Hilton Magic, pulled out the win. So on Tuesday night, not only were those two games crazy, but we had a couple other upsets to talk about as well, with Boise State taking down Colorado State, as we talked about last week with the Mountain West Conference and how difficult it's going to be to win in that conference. And we're already seeing some results there that are bringing 4 or 5 teams into the conversation for that conference championship. So on Tuesday night, those were the main games to focus on. We also saw Auburn get a win. Baylor beat BYU. Kentucky and Duke both won as well. The madness continued, though, on Wednesday night as well, as we saw 2 more top 5 teams fall. First of all, UCF beating Kansas 65-60 at UCF. Again, conference road games are tricky, and it doesn't matter who you're playing or how good you are. These teams, they get ready for these top 5 matchups as if it's the Final Four or the national championship for them. So Kansas goes down to UCF. And again, UCF is in their first year in the Big 12. So this is a program-defining win for them when they're so early in their tenure in the Big 12. I think that gives that team a big boost. That fan base has to feel fairly confident moving forward that they can compete, and they might even be a tournament team this year. The other top 5 upset on Wednesday was Mississippi State beating Tennessee by 5 at Mississippi State. The trend here is that all 4 of these top 5 teams that lost were conference games on the road to unranked teams. And it's quite surprising that we're seeing it happen this early with all these unranked teams. But I think all 4 of the teams that won have to feel pretty good now about their chances at a top half finish in their respective conferences, and also the strength of schedule and a potential tournament berth as we get closer to March. On Wednesday night, the only top 5 team that actually won during the week was Connecticut. They went on the road and beat Xavier at Xavier. So that's a good win for them. It wouldn't surprise me, depending on what happens this weekend, if UConn is the new number 1 team in the country come Monday when the AP poll is released. Some other upsets that occurred as well. TCU took down Oklahoma. Jamie Dixon at TCU does a great job there. He's made the tournament a handful of times. Oklahoma was number 9 going into that game, but TCU took them down. And then also Butler going to Marquette, number 11 in the country, and beating them by 7. Another big win for Butler, who is looking more and more like a tournament team the closer we get to Selection Sunday. So big upsets throughout the world of college basketball. But then on the other hand, we did, like I mentioned, UConn winning, North Carolina winning, Memphis winning, Wisconsin winning. So a lot of teams that have been there in past seasons are still at the top, and they're still doing well, but it is fairly topsy-turvy. And then finally on Thursday night, a couple games that really are knocking out some of the teams that even I had in my top 10 at the beginning of the year. First of all, Illinois, number 10 in the country, beat Michigan State. Michigan State, for all the accolades and how well Tom Izzo has coached that team over the years, at this point in the season, it is going to take an absolute miracle for that team to rebound and make it to the NCAA tournament. I just don't see it unless somehow they're able to win the Big Ten tournament, which at this point looks like a very far-reaching possibility. This is Tom Izzo's worst record in years, and it just looks like they have no momentum at this point. Illinois now looks like they could potentially win the conference, with Purdue struggling as well. And again, Michigan State looks like they're on the way out. And then a perennial contender, and one that we've seen get number one seeds in recent years, make it to the national championship a couple times in recent years. Gonzaga, who fell all the way to number 23, goes on the road and loses to Santa Clara on Thursday night. This would be the first time in forever that Gonzaga will not be ranked in the top 25. I think at this point, when you look at the bubble determination, I don't know if Gonzaga gets in the tournament. They just have too many losses, and playing in the West Coast Conference, the opportunity for big wins, those just aren't there. So I think both Michigan State and Gonzaga, two preseason top 10 teams, at this point, unless something drastically changes, I don't think either one even makes the tournament right now. So we will see on those two. It's going to be a wild weekend as well, but before we do that, just a quick look at the rankings as they stand going into the weekend. So again, Purdue, Houston, Kansas at 1, 2, and 3, but with all of them losing this week, I would expect all three to drop. Connecticut at number 4 and Tennessee at number 5. Over the last month of the season, we've seen a lot of stability there at the top, but going into next week, we're going to see some drastic changes. Some other teams to look at that either made big jumps or have fallen drastically based on results. First of all, Wisconsin looks like a team, along with Illinois, that is on the rise in the Big Ten. I was iffy on Wisconsin coming into this year, but Greg Gard continues to prove that he is a great predecessor to Bo Ryan, and he has that program moving in the right direction every single year. And then also Auburn moving up to number 16. The SEC is a very deep, talented conference, but Bruce Pearl continues to keep that program in the top third to top quarter of the SEC. That is no surprise to me, but coming into this year, I don't think expectations were quite at the level as far as what he's doing now. Now, we did talk about the Mountain West Conference, and we've seen some drastic shakeups when it comes to there. Colorado State is falling fairly drastically. Utah State and San Diego State are rising in the rankings. Again, it's going to be very volatile in the Mountain West Conference when half of the conference is in the running for the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of pressure, and it's going to be hard to come by wins on the road in the Mountain West. A couple other teams that fall just outside the top 25, but we definitely need to keep an eye on them. A couple that come to mind. First of all, Dayton. Dayton is a team, again, during the year 2020, probably would have been a number 1 seed if not for COVID and the cancellation of the tournament. They are now on the brink of jumping into the top 25 and being a mid-major to watch out for. Anthony Grant does a great job with that program. Also, James Madison picked up their first loss of the season this past week. They fall out of the top 25 to number 27. I have them squarely on the bubble right now. And another loss or two in the next couple weeks, and they're on the outside looking in. So James Madison, even though they had an unbelievable start to their season, undefeated for a long time, I would currently put them just out of March Madness, but they can work their way back in. And if they do win their conference, they'll get that automatic bid. So those are some of the teams to watch out for that are just outside the top 25 to keep an eye on and to see what happens moving forward. The other thing to note is that Houston was the last remaining undefeated team. They have now lost, so there are no undefeated teams remaining in Division I college basketball, which means that the last undefeated team of all time is Indiana, the 1975-76 Indiana Hoosiers, which is ironic because Bobby Knight passing away just a month or two ago was very tragic and really upended a lot of the history of college basketball and IU basketball. And it was fitting that the final team, the final coach to lose to secure Indiana as the benchmark still was Kelvin Sampson, who left Indiana in shambles just about 15 years ago. Okay, so that's the top 25 and some of the results from the past week. Now, coming up on Saturday, we have a ton of good games, so another good conference weekend in college basketball. And again, those top 5 teams that lost, they have to turn right around and get back at it. So, for instance, Tennessee is going to Georgia, who is a surprising 12-3 on the season. 2 back-to-back road games for Tennessee, losing to Mississippi State, now on the road against what seems to be a pretty good team in Georgia. Some other big games. North Carolina plays Syracuse. Again, Jim Boeheim is not the coach at Syracuse anymore, and North Carolina at number 7 with a win could take a pretty big jump in the standings and the rankings because of that, and can also have a firm hold on the top of the ACC with a win over Syracuse. Wisconsin and Northwestern now looks like a team that if the tournament started today, I would have in the field of 68. And like I mentioned with Wisconsin, if they continue to win, I think they could work their way up to a 2 or a 3 seed in March. Probably the biggest game of the weekend, 2 teams that just lost this weekend. Kansas is playing host to Oklahoma. The loser of this game has to feel pretty bad about how their week went, losing 2 games in a row. So this is a redemption game for both of those teams. It keeps one team in the mix for a Big 12 championship, and the other one, really, you have to start questioning where that team is going to stand as conference season rolls on. I think Kansas will win that game. I think they will bounce back after their loss to UCF. But Oklahoma is hungry as well. That's going to be a huge game. Some other games to look forward to. Purdue plays at home against Penn State. Can Purdue get back on track? They're now 14-2. More than likely, they are going to lose that number 1 ranking win, even if they win against Penn State. So how will they react, and how will they come back after that loss at Nebraska? UCF plays BYU at UCF. Now, again, UCF just pulled off that big upset win over Kansas. Can they make it 2 in a row against ranked teams when they take on number 18 BYU? That would be huge for their program and for Johnny Dawkins, the head coach there as well. And then a team that I'm really keeping an eye on, I'm still up in the air on how good they are, but the late game on ESPN on Saturday night is Baylor versus Cincinnati. Now, Baylor has struggled a little bit in recent weeks. I think they're going through some transition here between non-conference and conference games. I still believe in Scott Drew, and they have a really good team, but they're going up against a team in Cincinnati that is flying under the radar just a little bit. And I think if Cincinnati can pull off a win or 2 over their next couple games, they're going to be a team to watch out for in the Big 12, and again, maybe get a bid into March Madness, maybe be on the bubble or do even better. So looking at the conferences overall, I think the conference that is in the most turmoil right now is the Big 12. That's not completely unexpected when you have probably 10 teams in the conference right now that feel pretty confident that they can make it to the NCAA tournament. That's going to make it very difficult to succeed. And then the Big Ten, we've seen some teams like Nebraska and Northwestern rise in recent weeks. Wisconsin and Illinois continue to win. And Purdue and teams like Indiana are starting to fall off. Purdue, I still think, is the favorite, but definitely some turmoil there. And just looking at the overall field, there's still a lot of unknowns when it comes to what's going to happen in March. Usually at this point in the season, I can tend to pick out 9 to 10 teams that I think have the best opportunity to compete for a Final Four. But this year, as I look down the conference standings, every conference has a ton of teams that I think, given the right day, the right strategy, the right matchups, could make it pretty far in March Madness. So it's going to be very interesting to see, especially over these next couple of weeks. All right, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to discuss some of the coaches that I think should be fired immediately, some that are definitely on the hot seat, and some that are redeeming themselves by having a good year so far this season.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tybus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
All right, welcome back to the second half of the Full 40 College Basketball Podcast. So in this second half, I have a list of 12 current coaches in college basketball that are either so hot that it almost might be fair to fire them tomorrow, a couple coaches that really need to start picking things up immediately or they could be out by the end of the year, and then a couple coaches that started the year on the hot seat, but as of right now, based on the performance at the halfway mark, look like not only are they off the hot seat, but they could get their teams to the NCAA tournament and may have redeemed themselves in the programs that they're coaching. Now, I focused on power conference coaches for this list. There were many mid-major and low-major coaches that I could have picked as well, but for right now, I'm just going to focus on those coaches in the major programs that have just really either lacked success or off-court issues that are affecting them overall. So, for the first category, these are coaches that it wouldn't surprise me if they're fired before the year is even over. I'm going to start off with Kenny Payne at Louisville. Louisville has been an absolute disaster ever since the allegations came in about Rick Pitino and all the recruiting violations and the issues with that program from a couple years ago. Now, this is only Kenny Payne's second year at Louisville, but the results are just not there for such a once proud program like the Louisville Cardinals. Last year, Kenny Payne went 4-28 and only won 2 games in the ACC. This year, the team is off to a 6-9 start, and it doesn't look like things are getting any better in Louisville. I just don't see Kenny Payne having the traction, the support, or the player strength in order to bring this program back from where it started 2 years ago. If I'm Louisville at this point, it might just be best to cut ties and start all over. Kenny Payne just does not seem like the guy there. I've heard he's a very nice guy. I know John Calipari speaks very highly of him. I just don't think he was cut out to coach an ACC program, and one that has so much baggage that goes along with it. So Kenny Payne is the first coach that I would say if he survives the rest of this year, I'll be surprised, and I would probably say after this year, Louisville needs to move on. The second coach that I just don't see surviving either the rest of the year or probably will get fired quickly after this year is over is Tony Stubblefield at DePaul. Now, some of this is not Stubblefield's fault. I think DePaul has been a program where it's been almost difficult to win for the past 20, 25 years. They have not made the tournament in a long time, and so it was kind of a losing scenario no matter who the coach is. But Stubblefield just has not been able to gain traction there, and actually the teams have gotten worse in his years there. So he started coaching at DePaul in 2021, so this is his third year at the helm. They went 15-16 in his first year there, which is respectable, a pretty good start to his career, but then his win total dropped to 10 during last year, and right now they sit at 3-11 and still do not have a win in the Big East. This is just not trending in the right direction for Stubblefield. I don't think it's going to, and as the Big East continues to get stronger and stronger, there just doesn't seem to be a path forward for Stubblefield. So unfortunately, even though it's an almost impossible situation at DePaul, I think Stubblefield probably needs to go, and it wouldn't surprise me if he goes before the season is even over. All right, the next coach I have on this list that probably needs to be gone as soon as possible would be Wayne Tinkle, the coach at Oregon State University. Now, Oregon State is already in a lot of trouble based on the fact that the Pac-12 is dissolving, and as of right now, they don't have a home for next year. So Oregon State, just to maintain some stability, may hold on to Coach Tinkle for at least another year or two just so they don't have absolute chaos in their programs. But as of right now, I just don't see how you can keep him on board. Now, in the 2020-2021 season, he did take Oregon State to the Elite Eight. But outside of that, he's been coaching for 10 years now. He only has one other tournament appearance that was in his second year, and they lost in the first round. Since they made the Elite Eight in 2021, his teams have gone 3-28, 11-21. They're 9-7 this year, but have a 1-4 record in the Pac-12. I just don't see a path forward for him unless Oregon State decides, you know what, we'll just keep him on as we go through this conference transition. And right now, that's all that we can really do as we look to the future. But the results just aren't there. 10 years, 2 NCAA tournament appearances. They've really failed to ever compete in the top half of the Pac-12 under Coach Tinkle. And yeah, if I were Oregon State, I would highly consider getting rid of him as soon as possible. I have 2 more on my list that just to me seem like absolute must get rid ofs at this point. The next one would be Juwan Howard at Michigan. Juwan Howard is a tough one, though, because when you look at the connection that he has being a player at Michigan on one of the most famous recruiting classes of all time, the Fab Five, who took Michigan to 2 straight national championship games, now coming back and redeeming himself in the Fab Five after a little bit of there was a little bit of chaos there between Michigan and the Fab Five due to recruiting violations and some other things that took place. And there for about 20 years, there just was real communication problems between those players and the school. Juwan Howard came back, though, and it looked like that connection, that link was going to be revived and redeemed. But unfortunately, each year is getting worse and worse for Juwan Howard, not just on the court, but also off the court. So back in the 2020-2021 season, Juwan Howard's second year there, he did lead the Wolverines to the number one seed, or a number one seed, and made it to the Elite Eight before losing to UCLA. A very successful season, and hopes were very high for Juwan Howard. But since then, the team continues to slip. They went 19-15 2 years ago, 18-16 last year, and 6-10 to begin this year. Last year's team had 2 first-round selections in the NBA and the top transfer in the country who went to Kansas. So 3 players on that team that were all-American level type players. And with the 2 draft picks and Hunter Dickinson, they were unable to make it to the NCAA tournament. The other thing with Juwan Howard as well is some of the personal problems that Juwan Howard has dealt with. There were allegations that came out, and I don't know all the details on exactly what happened, but there was an argument between him and one of the strength and conditioning coaches at the University of Michigan. I don't know all the details, but it does speak to the fact that there have been anger issues, including an argument that occurred after a game at Wisconsin a few years ago. He was not happy with the way Wisconsin played at the end of that game, and he actually took a swing at one of the Wisconsin assistants after the game during the handshake line. There are just issues all over the board with Juwan Howard. I hate to say it because I love the Fab Five and what they meant to the University of Michigan, but I think it's time to cut ties with him and move on. But it needs to be done in a graceful way so that the Fab Five doesn't feel betrayed or Juwan Howard doesn't leave and that bridge is burned. Okay, I have one more coach who I think is probably going to be out either during the year or at the end of this season, and that is Jared Haas at Stanford. Now, again, it's not necessarily all of Jared Haas's problem. Stanford has struggled mightily for a long, long time now. They just have not been able to find their footing, and it might get even more chaotic as they move to the ACC next year. The travel schedule they're going to have is going to be crazy. So maybe Coach Haas can survive again to keep some consistency and less confusion going into next year. But again, the results just aren't there. Haas has been there since 2016 and has only had a handful of winning records and has yet to make the NCAA tournament with Stanford. In fact, they've only had one postseason appearance. That was in the 17-18 college season, and they made it to the NIT second round. So the results just aren't there. He consistently gets the team to around 500, including the last few years, 14-13, 16-16, last year 14-19. This year they sit at 8-7, and they are 3-2 in the Pac-12. But remember, the Pac-12 is not that strong, so 3-2 might sound good, but overall, if they continue at that winning percentage, they're probably not going to be in the running for an NCAA tournament bid. Jared Haas would really have to turn it around over these next 2 months to have any chance at keeping his job, but I just don't see it happening based on the last few years and the trajectory that Stanford is going. So I think Jared Haas has to be on his way out either during the year or come year end. Okay, the next group of coaches I'm going to be looking at are coaches that are very much on the hot seat, and you kind of want to tell these coaches, like, let's go, let's get this program going, another year or two of this, and you're going to be on the way out. And the first coach that I would put in that category is Bobby Hurley at Arizona State. Now, Hurley has had some success at Arizona State. It's not that he has completely has Arizona State falling off the map, but it seems to be going in waves for Bobby Hurley. Early on in his tenure, from 2017 to around 2020, he had that team winning 20-plus games a season, made 2 NCAA tournament appearances, and looked like he was taking that team in the right direction. But since then, he's only had 1 20-win season. That was in 22-23, and they only made it to the round of 64. They did not advance past that round. And so when you look at from 2020 until now, 11 wins, 14 wins, 23 wins. Right now they are 9-5 and 3-0 in the Pac-12. So I think Hurley has a little bit of rope to work with. But if he cannot get things going, if they somehow miss the tournament this year or struggle next year, I've got to think Bobby Hurley is on his way out. And again, this is a scary time for Arizona State. They're about to move to the Big 12, and as we talk about on this podcast a lot, the Big 12 is the toughest college basketball conference there is. That's going to be an extremely tough situation for Bobby Hurley and the Sun Devils starting off next year. So he really needs to meet those expectations this year if he keeps his job. A couple other coaches that really need to start performing or they're going to be on the hot seat. Mike Boynton at Oklahoma State. Now, since he's gotten there, they have been fairly consistently good, but as the Big 12 has gotten tougher, Oklahoma State has been on the losing side of most of those games. In fact, since Coach Boynton took over in 2017, only one time has Oklahoma State finished with a winning record in conference. Now, they have been able to reach 20 wins on 3 occasions since 2017, so they have had some solid seasons, and they also had Cade Cunningham, the top recruit and also a number 1 pick in the NBA draft, now with the Detroit Pistons. So it's not from lack of talent. They're still able to recruit at a pretty high level, but just the results overall have been mixed. It's not like they're terrible, but it's not like they're good either. They've only made it to 1 NCAA tournament where they made it to the round of 32 in 2021. But other than that, there's nothing else to really speak of for Mike Boynton. I think he's okay this year, but after this year, I'm just not sure the direction Oklahoma State goes with him. 2 other coaches that I look at and say they really need to get things going now or they're going to be gone fairly quickly. The next one is Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt is not necessarily known for their prowess in college basketball, but Jerry Stackhouse has just not been able to get that program to a point where he's got job security. He has improved the team almost every single year, but this year they have drastically fallen off the map. They currently sit at 5-10, and they're winless in the Southeastern Conference. So if I am Jerry Stackhouse, I have to start thinking that there might be a knock at my door soon asking for, for me to release my position as the head coach of Vanderbilt. I don't think that's this year, but if they don't do well this year and don't do well next year, I think Jerry Stackhouse has to be questioning whether he's going to be the coach there or not. And then finally on this list of let's get things going or you're going to be on the hot seat is Mike Hopkins at the University of Washington. Again, with Washington moving to the Big Ten next season, it might not be the right time to hand over the reins to a different coach, but Mike really needs to get things going soon or else he may be on the way out. First of all, he came over from Syracuse in 2017 and immediately had a lot of success, including the 18-19 season where he went 27-9, finished first in the Pac-12 with 15 wins in the regular season, made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament, and looked like one of the smartest hires in college basketball and put Washington as a team that looked like they were going to continue to develop and be great for quite a long time. But since then, since 2019, the win totals have included 15, 5, 17, 16. This year they're 9-6, but only 1-3 in the Pac-12. Similar to Oregon State, 1-3. You can improve from that, but in the Pac-12, that looks even worse because of how weak that conference has done. So the first 2 years were great, but since then he has failed to make it to the NCAA tournament and has only finished with a winning record in the Pac-12 one time, and that was an 11-9 record, so it wasn't even that great of a record overall. Again, they are 9-6 to start this year, but if they're not in the bubble discussion this year and they have another bad year next year, I've got to think Mike Hopkins is going to be out at Washington. Okay, and I'm going to finish today with 3 coaches that I definitely had on the hot seat going into this season, but based on how they've done so far, they might be working themselves off of the hot seat if they continue to do what they're doing. So the first one would be Johnny Dawkins at Central Florida. Now, Johnny Dawkins entered this season with fairly good records coming in, but with the transition to the Big 12, I think there were a lot of questions about whether or not he was going to be able to withstand the barrage of good teams in Big 12 conference play. Well, he has proven, at least early on, with a big win over Kansas, that they have what it takes to compete. And right now they're 10-4 on the year, 1-1 in the Big 12. And when you look at the last few years, they did win 18 games in 21-22, 19 last year in 22-23. They did not make it to the NCAA tournament. But this season, if they can remain competitive in the Big 12, if they can pull a couple more upsets and stay stable in the Big 12, I don't think UCF can get rid of Johnny Dawkins. Right now, he's done an incredible job this year, and if I'm UCF, I definitely look at keeping him moving into next year. 2 other coaches on this list that have definitely impressed this year to the point that I don't think they're on the hot seat anymore. First of all, Fred Hoiberg at Nebraska. Nebraska just pulled off a huge win at home against Purdue. That win by itself is impressive enough to make me think Fred Hoiberg has things going in the right direction. But also considering that he has increased the win total at Nebraska every single year, and right now sitting at 13-3 and 3-2 in a very deep Big Ten, has me thinking that he's probably off the hot seat and he might have this be a tournament team moving into March Madness. The win totals since he took over in 2019 have been 7, 7, 10, 16, and already 13 this season. So I've got to think that he's going to pick up at least 3-4 wins, probably even more. This is a team to watch out for and a program that I think Fred Hoiberg is going to continue to build. And at the end of this season, I think he's going to completely be off the hot seat, even though he started the year firmly on the hot seat. And then finally, the coach at Ohio State, Chris Holtmann. Holtmann entered this season with a lot of questions about where he was taking this program. Again, started off very hot at Ohio State. In the first, five years, unfortunately COVID hit in year 3, but in the first 5 years of his tenure, year 1 he made the round of 32, year 2 he made the round of 32, year 3 was canceled, year 4 he made it to the tournament, year 5 he made it to the round of 32. So the results were there, but Ohio State fans expect a lot more than just making it to the round of 32. And last year, he had his worst season at Ohio State at 16-19 and finished second to last in the Big Ten in the regular season standings. So I think a lot of people entered this year thinking Chris Holtmann needs a bounce back year or he's going to be on the hot seat. Well, he's having a bounce back year for sure. Right now, he has the Buckeyes at 12-3, 2-2, and right in the mix in the Big Ten. He has a good core nucleus, and it looks like he has salvaged what went wrong last year. Now, the big thing for him is going to be tournament success, Can he get Ohio State to the Sweet 16 and beyond? If so, then he will not be on the hot seat for a long time. But if he only continues to win one or maybe not win at all, that's just not good enough at a school like Ohio State. But as of right now, it looks like he's safe, and Ohio State is on the right track to be a tournament team this year. So those are the 12 coaches to keep an eye on. Some coaches that I'd be shocked if they survive the season. Some that really need to get things going or they're going to be on the hottest of hot seats. And then some that were on the hot seat but look like they're trending in the right direction and might actually be in okay shape moving forward. All right, well, I thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a great weekend watching college basketball. We will be back next week to see what happened and to discuss and analyze what's going on in the world of college basketball. You all have a good week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Press Play Podcast Network. To follow us on X, look up Press Play Pods. For sponsorship plans and more information, please email admin@pressplaypodcast.com. And to listen to all our shows and learn more about our network, please visit www.pressplaypodcasts.com.